Hey everyone, welcome to The Art of Aging, which is part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. On this show, we look at what it means to age in America and in other places around the world with positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire everyone everywhere to age with abundance. Very excited for today's episode. Our guest is the one and only Steve Cohn. Steve, great to have you on the show. I'm going into your background here. And just such an amazing career history. Steve, you're a pioneer in the world of marketing, PR, brand management, including being a founding partner at Epsilon, where you've created or led efforts to develop many of the national loyalty programs we know today, including United Mileage Plus, Hyatt's Gold Passport program, Saks First for Saks Fifth Avenue. You've held executive leadership roles at AARP, the American Bar Association, and you're now the Chief of Communications, Marketing, and Philanthropy for Capital Caring, which is one of the largest palliative care and hospice organizations in the country. He's also an author, folks. He's also a best-selling author, including Steal These Ideas, Marketing Secrets That Will Make You a Star, and Power Lines. Words that sell brand, grip fans, and sometimes change history. So I'm hoping that on this, we are here really to talk about the pioneering work you're doing in dementia care, especially with robotics, Steve. I'm hoping we can kind of slip and maybe just get some marketing tips in here for folks that are listening. So we can sort of steal.
I've been working a long time, haven't I?
Well, we can steal your ideas all over again, right? Maybe that's but I'm hoping that we can get into that because you've worked with so many amazing brands. You've worked with Hunter S. Thompson, for crying out loud, with Rolling Stone.
And Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, exactly. So I think that just getting a little slice of what it was like to work with those
very
leaders.
Similar in some ways.
So the through line there is going to be interesting to unpack, I think. But I do want to start with what you're doing right now, which is just some really terrific work in hospice, in palliative care. And I know that you're a guy that doesn't lack for opportunity, but you took this role and you built this work, at Capital Caring. So can you just give us a sense of really where's your passion coming from when it comes to this space?
Well, when I joined Capital Caring just short of 5 years ago, I didn't know much about hospice, but I learned very quickly. And it dawned on me that toward the end of life, people have a stark choice. Someone who's terminally ill and their family can either be cared for by a hospice team, most often in their home or wherever they reside, or they can be rushed back and forth to the hospital and way too often tragically die alone in the hospital. So the option is hospice or hospitalization. And why would anyone choose hospitalization? Usually being over-medicated. It's been proven that if you enroll sooner in hospice care, the patient lives longer than they would otherwise. They're in the setting they want to be in, which is the vast majority of the time at home, not in a sterile hospital room. And so we want people to understand that it's a major benefit that was created for every American, citizen or otherwise, virtually free of charge, minimum of 6 months and more if necessary. And it's just a tragedy that so many people that should benefit from hospice care don't. So my passion is to change that equation and get people not only in our service area but across the country to understand how important it is for the patient and also for the family, who is under more stress than the patient most of the time, dealing with a loved one toward the end of life. Don't have to go it alone. They shouldn't go it alone, and there's no reason to do that. That's what hospice care is and why it was created.
Yeah. And, I've had the privilege of unpacking this a little bit through United Church Homes, with our work with Ohio's Hospice. We're now, affiliated with Ohio's Hospice. Yeah. And it just strikes me that, in our move to managed care, in our desire for more holistic, person-centered care. A lot of that from a clinical experience really can be found, through what hospice and palliative care does, right? I mean, the methodology about just really being person-centered and supporting both the family and the patient. I mean, I can't think of many other organizations that are thanked in obituaries, and hospice seems to, and just the way you make it seems to be like the way you make people feel, right?
Yes, and you touched upon, I think, bereavement care, which we also provide when the patient dies to the family. Um, Group settings, individual one-on-one counseling, it can go on for months and even years. There's no time limit. It's not something we get insurance reimbursement for. We view it as our mission. And, you know, um, I had a woman I met who used our hospice care for her mother and her sister, who had a great line, because I think a lot of people think, well, I don't want these hospice people intruding into the privacy of my family life. Um, and what she said was that with our hospice care, in this case, Capital Carings, we were visible when we were needed and we were invisible when we weren't. So we weren't intruding on on their family time where they didn't need us. And I think that's an important point. I also think it's important to understand it really is a team. It's a physician, it's several different types of nurses typically, social worker, and non-denominational chaplain if they choose. Also, this doesn't preclude other doctors that they have worked with to visit them, or faith partners, whatever religion, if they have one. We're not excluding those people from visiting the patient and the family at all. So, but our team is there to make the patient pain-free and comfortable and the family as stress-free as possible. Those are our primary goals.
Yeah, and I can't think of many other situations that cause family more stress than, if a loved one is affected by Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. And I think that you certainly recognize this, and you have a particular interest, I think, in dementia care. Can you just share with our listeners some of the things that Capital Caring is doing in its approach to dementia care?
Sure. First of all, with the aging of the baby boomers, yours truly, I think are you too young to be a boomer, Mike?
I'm a Gen X.
Okay.
Mostly.
You'll catch up to us eventually, but dementia in all forms is now the third leading cause of death. Heart disease number one, cancer number two, and dementia is gaining on those two. And dementia, we all know, is a devastating disease, especially in the later stages, whether it's Alzheimer's or not, where the person afflicted essentially doesn't know who they are, doesn't know who anyone else is. And at the very end, all their systems just basically shut down. And that's why they die. But before that, and sometimes that's many years, sometimes it's a period of months, it really is an individual case situation. Before that, hospice care is targets dementia as one of the major diseases that we provide comfort and support for. And it's very important for people to know that, because a lot of people don't think dementia is something that is hospice qualified, and it totally is. And about 1 out of 3 of our patients in hospice care or palliative care have some form of dementia. And we spend a lot of time with the family members, as well as if there are professional caregivers involved. Sometimes there are, with going through exactly how they can better cope with their loved one or patient that has dementia. We just created recently um, a 63-page guide on caring for a dementia patient, which covers absolutely everything that you would need to know, including what are considered to be the precise conditions that are part of early stage, middle stage, and late stage. And middle and late stage are generally hospice qualified. And so that's just an example of something that can be very useful. And then how to deal with folks that are um, dementia patients that are often agitated, confused, hallucinatory. And so one of the best ways to calm them down, make them happier, really improve their daily life is, believe it or not, with what we call companion robotic pets.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, this is definitely something I wanted to unpack with you, Steve, because to your earlier point, I think that what I've learned is that families that are in this situation, they really want to know what's next, what to expect, what's normal and what's not. And I think that the guide that you're talking about is going to be a great resource. But I mean, it just seems that both for my experience, my very limited experience, and your more extensive experience with this world, I'm very impressed with what Ageless Innovation is doing with their Joy for All robotic pets and things like that. We certainly use some.
Right.
We've seen. I sort of explain it as the if you take this away from us, we're going to kill you factor in terms of the ROI here for staff. And we don't know exactly how it works or to what degree, but it just seems to work in terms of for many people. Can you explain how you use the pets? I mean, what and how you've really
Yeah,
taken off with
so
it?
so we see that the vast majority of the time, introducing a dog or a cat or a bird, dogs are most popular, just like they are in real life, and giving the patient something that's theirs, not to be shared unless they want to. Um, we all grow up either having a pet or wanting a pet. So, um, and um, and in fact, the vast majority of our patients have had a pet in their past lives, often very recently, and may still have family pets. But um, you know, certainly in the middle and late stages of dementia, they can't handle a real pet. They might inadvertently harm a real pet. And so these are a wonderful substitute. And we don't try to fool anybody, but again, the vast majority of the time, the patient thinks it's a real pet. It responds to sight, sound, and touch like live pets. They have heartbeats, the dogs and the cats. Um, you know, the only thing they don't do is move, and they don't need any kind of exceptional care. And um, the patient tends to name them, tends to keep them with them around the clock, and just it seems to be a kind of a pet blanket of comfort that calms them, makes them much more socially affable. And our clinical people tell me all the time that medications can be reduced very often by introducing a pet to the patient. And you probably, like I might get, gosh, I get emails and letters almost every week from family members just saying they're so grateful that we provided a pet for their loved one and how it's changed everyone's life for the better.
Wow.
So when you think about the fact that on average we're talking about $150 robotic pet with some AI in it, artificial intelligence, meaning responding to sight, sound, and touch. When you think about the low cost and huge impact for the better that they have, it's practically a miracle
Yeah.
that we're able to do this
Yeah. And,
and
and,
see an
and
amazing result.
that's great. And look, and you've run with this idea. I think that you're running a really big donation program for these pets to, I think, the Veterans
Right.
Administration. Can you you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. I find that if you go talk to an individual who represents themselves or a business or a foundation, if you show them how these pets operate, you almost always close the sale, so to speak, because people without dementia are just as enamored as dementia patients. And so um, we've been able to get fantastic donation support from individuals, businesses, and foundations. And one of the outgrowths of that is a program I created called Pets for Vets, Pets for Veterans that have some form of dementia. And as an example, right now, just happens to be in the early part of October, coming up, we are going to be providing a bunch of dogs, cats, and birds to every one of the 132 community living centers run by the Veterans Administration across the country for patients in those centers that have dementia.
It's outstanding. So Pets for
And
Vets, Pets for Vets is the name of the program, everyone. And I
yeah,
mean, that's the thing. Again, I don't know. It unlocks something within this disease. I mean, I know that you're your guide. You look at different parts of the brain, the way that it operates. But there's still so much we don't know. But these things seem to work. They work for me. They work for you. And I'm so glad that you're bringing it to so many other people.
there's a lot of clinical studies that have been done over the past 10 years that just reinforce what you and I have been talking about.
Yeah.
So, clinicians, scientists, they've all seen this behavioral change in dementia patients, as well as generally elderly folk who basically may not have dementia but are lonely and isolated and don't have access to a real pet or can't care for it. So that's why. And before Ageless Innovation came along, which was a spinoff of Hasbro, the only robotic pet you could buy was $6,000, and it
Right.
didn't really look much like a dog. So this has been an incredible solution that, I first learned about this group when you and I were at AARP, and but I didn't really think about it much until I looked into it a little more when I got to Capital Caring and saw the clinical studies, one done by AARP, on how the robotic pet companion can change overnight or instantaneously a dementia sufferer's life. So, full speed ahead. That's what so this program has been gaining momentum here for now almost 2 years. And by the way, we provide the pets free of charge to anyone in our service area or beyond who requests one for a loved one. And thanks to donations, we're able to do that.
That's amazing. So for listeners, this is Capital Caring, a companion pet project. Ageless Innovation is the producer of these pets. And let's talk about where things are going, Steve, because we talk about this world of AI. We talk about there's so much now as we record here in late September of 23 around where generative AI is going. There's been at our Ruth Frost Parker Center symposium last year, we had a focus on technology and ethics when it comes to aging, and just a plug for the annual Ruth Frost Parker Symposium this year on October 6th, 2023, with our focus on ending ageism. But when we're talking about this, Steve, we sort of get into this sort of call and response on ethics, about how real is too real, about what these next, what if the personification was not a pet but with a person? What if that where do you see this going? Have you formed an opinion yet on where this lands for you, or is it just something you're keeping an eye on it, and the next time something's presented to you, then how are you preparing for that?
Well, I think AI can make interactions with the medical community more seamless and more accurate. You know, this is not a new concept. I mean, a bunch of years ago, IBM's Watson machine was being talked about as really the new wave of doing diagnostics on figuring out what people are really suffering from and coming up with solutions. I frankly don't know where that's gone, but I think the concept was correct that any super duper computer can look at billions of possibilities in an instant and figure out what might be the best solution for this particular patient, right? Which a doctors, scientists, and so forth can decide if that makes sense or not. But the equations can be done, in very rapid form. Essentially a second opinion, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's a real positive part of what AI should provide going forward.
Yeah.
And you're told all the time you should get a second opinion if you have a serious disease. So here's a way to get it, and with a computer brain in addition to a human brain.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it. I don't see caring for dementia patients being much different in terms of their daily life routine. Um, I think the robotic pets, for instance, eventually will be able to alert the caregiver if they sense stress in the patient. And that may be a new feature in another year or two. Ageless Innovation got a grant from NIH to explore that um, as an added feature, and I know they're working on it.
Hmm. That's yeah, and the whole world of voice analytics, sound analytics, and that is kind of this
Yeah, and
next phase of
there
AI.
are there are all kinds of AI type companies. I don't remember the name of this one, but for instance, there's one that if a person has a stroke, a severe stroke, and they're not able to speak in understandable language, there's a device now that can translate what essentially their gibberish into sentences that their loved ones, doctors, and so forth can understand. Pretty amazing. So
Absolutely.
that's a example of how the new technology world can really be helpful um, in this case with a stroke victim.
Yeah, and I've even seen things like, everyone seems to have an Apple Watch these days, and the biometric and the
Except
telemetry
me.
data, all those, yeah, they're all there. I mean, I saw something at the AARPH Tech Collaborative the other week, and shout out to the AARPH Tech Collaborative. But they had one startup that was using the Apple Watch or a Garmin or a wearable to track Parkinson's tremors, and
Uh-huh.
doing some trend analysis to see, does it happen after meals or change of meds or things like that. So it just seems like we're going to have more and more data. The other thing that strikes me about AI, and I'm hoping that we're going to get Victor Wang from Care.Coach on this, because he said something great the other week at the AARP event, that when you're looking at geriatrics, we're looking, if I'm a cardiologist, cardiologists know everything about the heart.
Yeah.
Geriatrics is kind of knowing everything about complexity, right? And AI can be useful in making sense, taking complex things and maybe organizing and helping us make sense out of that. So that kind
Yeah.
of struck me.
And of, and of course, robotics are big in operating rooms today, and have been for quite a while, and for very delicate surgeries, brain surgery, eye surgery. Um, And so, that's sort of taken for granted these days, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And which is a good
Steve,
thing.
Steve, I'm going to switch. I want to talk marketing with you for a second. I've always wanted to talk marketing. Full disclosure, guys, I used to work for Steve at AARP. I worked for him twice at SureScripts. I worked with him at AARP. We both come from a marketing discipline, and I've always wanted to kind of ask a few questions about some of the things you've done. But before we do that, plug away. Where should people find you? Where should people find the your robotics pets program?
Well, the easiest thing to do is just go to capitalcaring.org/companion pets, and everything they want to know is there.
That's awesome.
capitalcaring.org/companion pets. I also have Pets for Vets, capitalcaring.org/pets for vets. So those two URLs will drive people to everything they want to know about the pet program, how they can order a pet if they want, how they can donate a pet, for both, and for which program, whether it's for vets or just people in general, or for terminally ill children, who we also provide the pets for.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for listeners, we're going to drop those into our descriptions of this episode when we put this on YouTube and the other, so you guys will have a chance to link directly. But as a reminder, capitalcaring.org/companion pets, capitalcaring.org/pets for vets. So, Steve, I brought my books with me. Steal These Ideas.
That's the old one.
That is the old one, but it's my copy. And then Power
That's version one.
Version 1. What drove you to put all this stuff down on paper? I mean, how did you manage?
I had two different reasons for the first book. So I had been, my whole marketing career, I'm just irritated with the fact that people don't understand the fundamental principles of marketing, regardless of what technology is up to. You still have to convince a consumer to do something. And how do you make a compelling offer? And, there are really only three ways. You got to use excitement, visual or sensory or both. You've got to keep the pitch pretty simple and real, and have real news value, something they wouldn't know otherwise. So excitement, news, and then a compelling call to action. Those three things. I call it marketing's ENA instead of DNA. And that's what I talk a lot about in that book, Steal These Ideas. And I also talk about just basic stuff that, I sometimes say some outrageous things like all art directors should be shot because they create stuff that no one can read. The type's too small. Why would you use white reverse body copy? Why would you ever use sans serif type, which is 10 times harder to read than serif type? And, so I just was agitated for years about why don't people understand these basic marketing facts? And I was collecting a lot of data to do a book, and I kept it all in my office at 7 World Trade Center. And then when 9/11 hit and eventually my building disappeared, I was in a funk for a while because I had all this accumulated, slides and articles that I had saved and all this stuff that was going to be the basis for my first book. But then finally I decided, I don't need any of that stuff. It's all up here. And so I just sat down and wrote the book, which was, I think it came out in 2000, the one you're showing came out in 2005, 2006. Then I got another bug in my brain about a couple of years later about how awful taglines had become, and companies walking away from great lines that they should have kept forever. And very few companies understand that, and I don't care what size company, from small to large. Also, how powerful jingles can be, and which has turned into a lost art for most large companies anyway. And so I decided I was going to do something about it and write down what makes a great tagline and slogan in the political world, and why you should never change a great line, which all these supposed marketing genius driven companies have not figured out. Because
So,
at the end of the day, a tagline is a brand promise that the consumer doesn't want to have to see changing all the time. And it's pretty remarkable too that what most people remember are just fantastic taglines that were dropped for no other reason other than boredom in the C-suite. And all the current taglines that have replaced them have no traction. And that's with a lot of major companies like Coca-Cola, like American Express, like Federal Express, who should have never changed the lines that put them on the map in the first place.
I mean,
And
we can still remember those lines. We can still remember "Coke is it."
yep,
We can
yep.
still remember,
Don't leave home
the
without it.
ultimate driving machine. You know, it's all of,
BMW, BMW, one of the few companies that has never changed their brand promise. So 65 years later, they're still using the ultimate driving machine.
right.
And that's a rarity, but it's the right thing to do. Because while the C-suite folks and the chief marketing officer might be bored with how do we keep saying the same brand promise, the consumer isn't, because the consumer only thinks about you occasionally when gee, now I want to buy a car, or now I want to get a six-pack of Coke, or whatever. But you're not top of mind with them 24/7. Only, only because you work at the place that you think about it all the time.
You know,
And GE's another example, which should have never left "We bring good things to life." And what's their tagline today? No one knows. They used some really strange ones
all this. I mean,
recently.
it's weird how subliminal this can be, right? We see these are artifacts that once you create advertising, once you create newspapers, magazines, these are all artifacts out in the world, and these are all things that we see continuously through our lives, right? So, we associate, we bring, at least me and Gen X and you and baby, we bring good things to life for GE. It's still relevant. They still bring good things to life. It's just that you're giving up all that equity that you've built over the past, right? I feel the same way around cereal boxes when they change the graphics and they put that thing up there saying new. It's like, oh, hey,
Well,
everybody, get into the
and
kitchen. What happened? It just doesn't seem to track.
co-created in the 70s, it's the real thing. They should have kept that.
Yeah,
Um, they've used all these other lines since that no one understands or cares about. Back in the 20s, they created a great line, the pause that refreshes. And they would have radio disc jockeys open a Coke next to the microphone um, as part of their strategy. And then we got Pepsi. You're in the Pepsi generation. Well, you're always in the Pepsi generation. So why would you walk away from that? Federal Express should have kept when it absolutely positively has to get there overnight. That's the only reason they're in business. Um, Now, you can be successful without a tagline, and sometimes it's better than having a crummy one that you spend a lot of money on that no one cares about. I mean, Apple's a good example of that. They don't have any taglines currently, but they still create product excitement. They always have new features on their latest rendition of their iPhone or their laptop, and they always try to have a compelling reason to respond. And they're the most valuable company in the world, right?
yeah.
So the basic facts for marketing success, which I laid out in that book, haven't changed. And I don't think they ever will.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, books are Steal These Ideas. What's the second one called, Steve? More Steal These Ideas? Oh, there's an updated
No, it's just the second.
second
Yeah,
edition.
yeah.
Now it's in its second
And,
edition with Steal These Ideas. Power Lines,
and
Words That Sell. Yeah, Power Lines, Words That Sell
Power
Brand.
Lines, I enjoyed writing Power Lines a lot. And there's a whole section in there about the use and misuse of slogans in the political world and how they affected presidential elections. And,
Because you
again, in
said
this
the
case, it's
simplest line always wins, right? Is that like just something you've always observed within political campaigns? The simplest line wins.
actually what wins is a slogan only works for two reasons, one or two reasons. Either it focuses on a singular issue that millions of Americans say, darn it, that's right. And there's a lot of slogans over time that have had that one way back in when Polk was running for president, 54-40 or fight, which you may remember from high school, was about a dispute we had with Canada
Yeah, I
on
remember
the
that. In
Northwest.
Canadian school, we know 54-40 or fight. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You were on the other side of that
What's on the other side of
when you
that?
were a Canadian citizen. Well, we almost went to war with England a third time in the 1840s because of that issue. And the other way slogans work, which are more popular, are to reinforce the positive personality of the candidate. And a lot of examples of that. I like Ike. FDR kind of used a combination of both, um, a singular issue and his personality, which was very optimistic. Happy days are here again. And Reagan used both. And the first time he ran, had a long line, but people remembered it. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Everyone said, absolutely not. When if you wanted to buy a house at that time, the interest rates were 20%, 18%. And there were gas lines. Unfortunately, Jimmy Carter suffered all those afflictions and lost to Reagan when he ran in 80. And then in 84, he changed he had a genius ad guy, who was a guy, not a gal in this case, Hal Riney, who created both those lines. And the second time around, running against Mondale, it's morning again in America. Everything's better. Everything was better. The economy was getting much better. Our status in the world had improved a lot. People were respecting us. And that was the biggest electoral landslide in history when he ran against Mondale. Mondale only won his home state by only 3,000 votes, which was Minnesota. And so that kind of shows the power of slogans. Slogans are just a name for a political brand promise as opposed to taglines in the commercial world. A slogan comes from the word slogum, which is an old Scottish word which means war cry. So there's a reason why slogans became slogans. They're modern day war cries. And the other point, which is really true on both sides, commercial and political, is don't ever discount the power of sound over sight. Sound is 100 times more powerful than sight in terms of mind retention. And whether you love Trump or hate Trump, when he first ran against Hillary, and no one remembers what the heck her slogan was because she never talked about it and never spoke it, Trump would say, make America great again. Let's make America great again, over and over and over and over and over, every chance he got, every interview, every debate. Make America great again, make America great again. He would say it all the time. And that's how it sunk into people's minds, not showing a bunch of banners. So, and I talk in the book about how sound is the major sense that allowed our ancestors to survive.
Yes.
Not sight. They couldn't rely upon sight, but they could rely upon, is this a good sound or a bad sound? And should I be happy or should I be fearful? And that's still how our minds work and how we retain sound essentially forever. So, and even dementia patients. So you play a rock and roll song from the 60s for a dementia patient, they may very often recognize it and be able to sing along, even if they don't know anyone else in the room. So that's pretty interesting. So the power of sound is amazing, and that's part of what I talk about in that book.
Terrific. Steve, this is a great way to bookend the conversation. Thank you so much for being such a great podcast guest. We do like to put people through the ringer a little bit and ask them 3 questions about their own experience in aging. We ask the same questions to all guests. Can I do this with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So our question number 1 that we always like to ask is, when you think about how you've aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown with you that you really like about yourself?
Well, I have this personal philosophy, which I've had for a long time. So as I age, I haven't changed it. Every day is a gift and every life's a miracle, even those people that you don't particularly like. And so I'm happy every day I wake up because it's better than the alternative as far as I know. And well, it may not be better than heaven or hell. It would be much better than hell.
We don't know.
But, I'll worry about that is at a later date, hopefully. But I think not taking life for granted and trying to, I also consider myself an existentialist, which is a highfalutin term, which means, look, whether you believe in a divine being or not, your role on earth is to make the place better and leave it better than you found it. And so that's part of my daily philosophy.
It's terrific. Okay. Thank you for that. Question number 2. What has surprised you the most about you as you've aged?
I think this is true of a lot of people. I don't feel older, although my body sometimes lets me down. But I don't really feel like I'm an old person. And I hate it when people say, oh, I'm so old and it's terrible and doesn't aging suck? And, I suppose there's a lot of truth to that, but so what? I mean, that's not the way you should think about, going through every day. It's much more fun to be optimistic and, take care of yourself mentally and physically as best you can. And yes, aging, I can't run marathons anymore. I can't run anymore. I was an avid runner. I ran 12 marathons in my 30s. But I power walk, I do other forms of exercise, and it doesn't mean I'll necessarily live longer, but I'll feel better while I'm alive.
That's terrific. Thank you, and thank you for sharing that. Okay, last question for you. Is there someone that you've met or been in your life that has set a good example for you in aging? Someone that inspires you, as we like to say here, to age with abundance?
Yeah, my dad's mom, my grandmother, who well into her 80s was still playing tennis. My grandfather had told me years before that she was terrible at tennis at any age, so it didn't matter. And she also played bridge well into her 90s, the game of bridge. In fact, when I was a little kid, I used to ask her, not so little, but when I would visit her in her apartment in New York City, and she had the Times delivered every day with her breakfast. She had a maid that, So she was fairly well off and had servants running around. One of them would bring her breakfast in bed every day, and I would pop into the bedroom. And I would notice she would look at the obituary page first in the New York Times, and I would say, "Granny, why are you looking at the obituaries?" And her answer, which was truthful, "Stevie, I want to make sure I have a bridge game later this afternoon." Uh, and she wasn't kidding. So,
Right.
um, and so she was a great role model. Family was important. She would have family parties. She died at the age of 95, walking she walked across the street, wasn't looking, and got run over.
Oh dear.
Um, it,
That's
it
that's how
wasn't the
she that's
driver.
how she left. Is that she would have kept going.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Um, but a great role model. Don't let age get in the way of doing what you want to do, enjoying life, and keeping your brain active.
And what I love
So,
about that story, Steve, is that so often, and you're a marketer, I'm a marketer. We see these images of people in aging, and they're either, they're not very complimentary, or they may be fantastical. People like looking at VR headsets, or people skydiving, or things like that. But the truth of the matter is, there's far more people out there than you'd expect, just playing tennis, playing golf, playing bridge, going out and doing these active things well into their 90s and hundreds, right?
yeah, there are marathon runners, God love them, who are in their 90s, right? Um, I started having pulling too many muscles, and which is why I also stopped tennis. I haven't tried pickleball, but maybe I should.
Well,
uh,
well, pickleball is for an entirely other, different podcast. And if we do this again, Steve, and if you're
yeah,
taking, I want
yeah,
to get your report on that. But Steve, I just want to again thank you for being such a terrific guest on the podcast.
sure, my
We're delighted
pleasure. Thanks
to
for
have you.
having me.
And just to remind folks where to find Steve, capitalcaring.org, especially when you're looking at the companion pets and the Pets for Vets programs. That's capitalcaring.org/pets for vets, capitalcaring.org/companion pets. Your two books, Steal These Ideas, now it's a new version. Power Lines, Words That Sell Brands, Grip Fans, and Sometimes Change History, both your books. Steve, if I'm leaving anything else that you'd like to pitch at this point?
I don't think so, Mike. I've really enjoyed chatting over this hour, and I have a great respect for United Church homes and what you're doing out there all over the country. And so, thanks for having me on your podcast today.
Great, thanks. And thanks most of all to our listeners for listening to this episode of The Art of the Age. Yeah, I can't speak. And Mom, I'm trying to speak slower, okay? I know you're listening. Thank you, our listeners, for listening to this episode of The Art of Aging, which is part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. And we want to hear from you. How has hospice touched your life? What has been your experience being a dementia caregiver? Have you heard about robotic pets, and what interest do you have? Have you tried them out? And then share your marketing tips with us as well. And hopefully you picked up some great info from Steve here today on marketing best practices. Visit us at abundantagingpodcast.com to share your ideas. Find other episodes at abundantagingpodcast.com and on YouTube under United Church Homes. And you can also give us feedback and learn more about the terrific work of the Ruth Frost Parker Center with its mission to end ageism at unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.